The struggle. "No, sir," said the Count. "You are safe. Calm yourself." "Ah, mother!" cried Mordaunt, with eyes of fire, with a look of hate impossible to paint. "I can only offer thee one victim, but it shall at any rate be the one thou wouldst thyself have chosen." And whilst D'Artagnan uttered a cry, Porthos raised the oar, and Aramis sought a place to strike. A frightful shake given to the boat precipitated Athos into the sea, whilst Mordaunt, with a shout of triumph, grasped the neck of his victim, and in order to paralyze his movements, twined arms and legs around the musketeer. For an instant, without an exclamation, without a cry for help, Athos tried to sustain himself on the surface of the water, but the weight dragged him down. He disappeared by degrees. Soon nothing was to be seen except his long, floating hair. Then both men disappeared, and the bubbling of the water, which, its turn, was soon effaced, alone indicated the spot where these two had sunk. Excerpt from 20 Years After by Alexandré Dumas, published as a series from January to August 1845. Preface. 20 Years After is what is known as the sequel to the book The Three Musketeers, written by Alexandré Dumas. In the first book, the three established musketeers of King Louis XIII, Athos, Porthos, and Aramis, had an addition by the person of a young valorous Gascony named D'Artagnan. The adventures in the last book involved an arch-villain named Milady, a seductive temptress who killed and destroyed lives without compunction. In 20 Years After, we meet her son named Mordaunt, an apple not fallen far from the tree. Mordaunt was under the employ of General Oliver Cromwell and had been on the path of seeking revenge on the people who executed his mother, which included our four heroes. 20 years after the first adventure, we find the musketeers embroiled in a situation at a pivotal point in history, the execution of Charles I of England. The scene I take my flash short story from is at the chapter in the book where the adventurers headed back to France from England after the king was executed, and they are in a felucca ship filled with casks containing black powder, an ambuscade set up by the evil Mordaunt to blow up the musketeers and their lackeys. Mordaunt and his cohorts planned to detonate the powder keg by way of a lengthy rope and escape via a longboat which was attached to the felucca before the eruption of the explosives. Unbeknownst to the musketeers and company, they embarked the ship. By chance, the musketeers' lackeys Grimaud and Mousqueton discover the casks laden with black powder. The musketeers with their lackeys then escape out of the ship in the dead of night, utilizing the longboat which the villains had set up for themselves before Mordaunt and his company could blow up the vessel. At the time appointed, Mordaunt lights up the rope which was connected to the casks without knowing that their escape route had been hijacked by his enemies. Having already lighted the rope and finding it was too late to extinguish the explosives, Mordaunt jumps off the vessel onto the sea, leaving his cohorts to perish in the explosion. At sea, Mordaunt calls on to the musketeers for help and pleads to be allowed into the longboat and be saved. Everyone on the boat refuses except for Athos, who felt compassion towards the drowning man. Athos reaches out his hand to Mordaunt, and then treachery. The book does not detail the account of what happened underwater between Athos and Mordaunt, and in my imaginarium, I envisioned the struggle between the two and penned the words as follows. The struggle, written by me, arised. The moment Athos realized what had happened, his bewildered eyes gaped at the diabolical face of Mordaunt, which bore the expression of evil determination to drag him down to the abyss of the sea to certain death. The remaining flickers of the embers from the felucca illumined Mordaunt's face in a series of flashes which shone under the water. It was as if Athos was transfixed in a spell and time stood still. It became pitch dark during the momentary intervals when the flares of the fire ceased, and as the possibility of his demise loomed, Athos saw the face of Raoul as if he could touch it, right there. Raoul, his only son, Raoul, full of hope and youth, and Raoul who, at this very moment, was ignorant of his origin and the truth about his parentage. The truth that he, the man who was known as the Comte de la Fère by title, Athos to his friends and the Musketeers of the Guards, was his very own flesh and blood. However, and apropos of the situation, Athos longed to be with his son at this very moment. His heart despaired to tell him of how proud he was of him, of the man who had become, and how there was so much more he could impart to him in knowledge, in skill, and in affection. These reflections vacillated in rapidity from reverie to reality. Then suddenly, Athos was jolted back to his perilous situation. He writhed violently to escape from Mordaunt, and when he was able to free his arms from the scoundrel's clasps, he swam upwards with brute force. He felt the descent towards the bottom of the sea decrease in momentum. However, for his part, Mordaunt's arms and legs were still entwined around Athos's girt and thighs like that of a serpent, and breaking loose from his assailant was all but straightforward. Athos then reached for a lump of black hair and pulled it with such strength until it tore off from Mordaunt's skull, and he perceived his assailant's grip break free. Athos swam with all his might, kicking upwards to the surface for want of air, and at the same instant Mordaunt's head also emerged above water. Under the thunderous explosive bolt of the last cask of black powder from the sinking ship, the two adversaries locked into one another's stare. One had an inexorable determination for murder, the other for survival, and in the name of everything he had to live for. Only moments earlier, Athos offered refuge to this misguided son of his first wife, the heinous, the murderous Milady de Winter. Athos felt certain misgivings with how the condemnable woman's execution came about at the River Lys, with Milady not having been brought to trial, and he partaking of the punishment. He perceived debt was owed to her son. Hence, Athos gave his hand to Mordaunt. The remonstrances of his friends came to naught, for all would have been lost for the younger man, and the sea would have been his graveyard, along with the doomed felucca ship now descending deeper into the channel. However, rather than take Athos's hand in gratitude, Mordaunt pulls it down with a devious intention in mind. Moreover, charity once again came to Athos while underwater when he thought to simply relinquish Mordaunt over to the sea, and not having to lay a hand on him, even in the face of treachery. But the relentless malefactor was unwavering in his desire to kill Athos. After these, Athos then realized what he had to do. Surreptitiously, he reached for the poignard tucked in his vest. Suddenly, Mordaunt lunged at Athos once more, but this time the Comte was ready. Like the skillful soldier that he was, habituated in battle, he waited for this moment. As Mordaunt began to pull Athos's shoulders back down to the sea, pushing, writhing, dragging, Athos wedged his left arm on Mordaunt's chin and plunged his poignard into the villain's chest, thrusting it in to the fullest, that only the handle could be seen of the dagger. Mordaunt was seized with fright. His hand felt the cold handle of the poignard planted into his heart. His forehead wrinkled for an instant as the water around him turned red. In his last moment, he leered at Athos and reached for him, but in vain. Reached for the man who could have given him clemency. Reached for him, but still without remorse. As Mordaunt descended into the deep, his eyes had a permanent look of terror that peered through eternity. Athos tried to remain afloat, and discovered he was all alone in the dark of night in the sea. He looked round and wondered how far he might have drifted from his friends during the struggle, as there was no sight of the bark that Porthos, Aramis, D'Artagnan, and the lackeys had remained in. He surveyed the direction to which he thought they would be situated, and swam vigorously towards it. He paused to catch his breath, and still no sign of his companions. "Mordieu!" he cried. "I triumph over Mordaunt, but only to perish in this channel after all." He wondered whether all was lost now. Then, at a distance towards the east, the howling of a Titan could be heard. "Oh, Athos, Athos, thou man of noble heart, woe is me! I have let thee perish." Footnote. This quotation is taken directly from the book. End of footnote. It was Porthos! Through the undulating waves, Athos saw the longboat alighted with a torch at a short distance of about 1/16 of a league, where his friend stood pointing with lamentable and horrified expression. "Capital! Ha ha!" the musketeer explained. Trembling but resolute, Athos mustered all he could once more, and swam towards the boat to reunite with his friend.